unfiltered discussions, unexpected guests. No topic is off limits, from sex and relationships to the human condition, personal anxieties, and so much more. The only talk show of its kind in the world. This is The Last Show with David Cooper.
Hello and welcome to the show. It's Tuesday night and welcome to you. Did I already welcome you? Well, welcome. We got a great lineup for you tonight. We'll cover a recent study on misinformation, specifically who falls victim to it on the internet. Spoiler, it might be you. It might be the case that the more you think you're invincible to misinformation, the more likely you are to fall for it. So don't believe everything you see on the internet, or at least listen to what an expert has to say on the matter in about 10 minutes' time. Then, a job you and I could probably never do, an aerialist and circus performer will be joining me, and boy, do I have questions about that job. I get dizzy climbing a step stool. How is it that somebody flies through the air without a safety net for a living? And why on earth would they do it? Answers we'll find out halfway through the hour. That is just some of tonight's show. We got a great lineup for you. Let's dive in.
Want to be part of The Last Show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644.
Apes, bonobos, chimpanzees. I often ask, are we any better than them? Turns out they might be better than us. Because, according to new research, when someone in their primate group is upset, they don't just look down and scroll on their phones and ignore them. They reach out. They show empathy. I'm here with psychologist and primatologist Dr. Jake Brooker from Durham University in the UK to discuss. Jake, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I didn't ask you if you like to go by doctor. I just assume you did. Everyone's got a different opinion on that one.
Yeah, I didn't do a PhD for 4 years to not use it. And
that's what I always tell people.
Exactly. As soon as I graduated, my mum changed me on her phone to Dr. Jake, and that's how she answers the phone every time.
That's why we're here, to make our mothers proud.
Exactly.
Okay, let's start simple. What does consolation look like in chimps and bonobos? Like, how can you be sure that you're observing that when you study them?
Yeah, so it's been quite a contentious topic through the history of studying animals, but in a very condensed way. When a fight or some spontaneous distress occurs in a chimpanzee group, for example, an individual will be screaming, they'll be really upset. And what we do is we check to see who approaches and if there's any affiliative contact that they offer towards them. And they use a variety of different behaviors. We compare those situations to normal, like everyday occurrences to see if it's similar, the amount that they would offer contact compared to just a normal period of time without the distress. And over the last, say, 40 years, there's been a lot of these studies showing that there are a variety of species that use comforting behavior like the same way that humans do as well.
What, just like a hand on the shoulder, a neutral look? What does comfort look like amongst primates?
It can be as simple as just sitting in like close contact with somebody. So they just put, their arms against each other and their fur. They're very sensitive with that. But they might hold hands. They might embrace one another. They use a lot of sexual behavior as well, like touching genitals, mounting, things like that. Yeah. So it's very similar in some ways to the stuff that we use as well. Yeah.
I am trying so hard not to crack a joke right now, and I think I just succeeded. What are moments of distress in primates? Like, what would really cause a primate distress such that another would come over and provide some comfort or empathetic touch?
It's usually a fight. It's usually someone has stepped over the line and they've attacked another individual. Chimps have this reputation for being aggressive, and there's a lot more to them than just their aggression and their competition. But they will hit one another. They'll maybe bluff at one another, like threaten. They might chase each other, and those kind of different types of conflicts, they can cause individuals to become really, really upset. I mean, chimps are really sensitive. Sometimes you can just look at them funny and they get really upset.
Yes.
Not me, I don't do that, but the other chimps, of course.
Yeah. These are you say not me, these are our distant cousins.
Yeah.
Does that say anything about our evolutionary history, that we're kind of hardwired for comfort and empathy? It's not like a higher order learned thing that only humans have?
Yeah, for the longest time, we thought empathy was one of these things that's just unique to humans. We use it as a way of making us feel special, I think. But it turns out that there's so many species out there that have at least the building blocks of empathy. It's not just one simple thing. It's an amalgamation of different components and different behaviors that, in humans, it arises to what we think is a very unique and special form of empathy. But we see so many of these different behaviors in other species that maybe we've been a bit too conservative in what we think, we think makes us special and unique.
We've been cold and callous when it comes to looking at other species, thinking that we're much better than them, which I think makes those other species maybe better than us. I don't know.
Maybe because they don't think about us that way. I don't think they really care too much about what we do, provided we're not hurting them. One thing, I think this is something that's been a problem with animal research throughout the years. We hold them to, I think, higher standards than often we might even hold ourselves to. We expect that if they don't perform a behavior the same way we would do, or if they can't solve a task in the same way that humans can, then it means that they don't have an ability or that they don't have the capacity for something. And we very rarely look at them from their point of view. We need to always take into account their unique qualities and their different social worlds and how that will impact upon the way they behave. And so we see that with the constellation. It's not just something that happens all of the time. It's going to be very individual, and it's going to be very dependent on their individual personality and their social relationships as to whether or not they actually offer constellation in the first place. And it might also be due to the situation itself, like the conflict and who initiated the conflict, what other political stuff is going on as well.
You looked at bonobos, you looked at chimpanzees. Don't bonobos have a reputation for being like really nice, having lots of sex and stuff, and chimps being a little more aggressive? Is that stereotype correct? And does your research flip that script?
Yeah, I would say it's not 100% correct. So ever since we started studying bonobos and chimps, we've had these very stark Jekyll and Hyde-like personality characteristics that we ascribe to them. Chimps they're the warmongers and the vicious beasts and
the chest beaters. It's like the classic video of them beating their chest aggressively.
Yeah, that's they've built themselves a reputation, and I think on some levels maybe. Oh, I wouldn't say it's deserved, but I can understand how it's happened. I can understand from the stories how they've got this story about them. But and the same with bonobos, the make love no war aspect, that they resolve all of their conflicts with sex, and they just hang out and intermingle with other groups, and they're really peaceful.
They're hippies, basically. They're the ones at the Grateful Dead concert, and then the other ones are the ones at the MMA fight,
That is an excellent comparison. But yeah, that's what we thought for the longest time. Or at least that's what was really presented, I think, based on the research. Like, that's what the public really started to think about these species. And I think people who studied them could really see that it wasn't that simple, because we've known that chimpanzees console for a long time, and yet they don't really have a reputation for it. They don't have a reputation for being a sexual species as well. They don't have a reputation for showing empathy. And yet these things are really core to their social world in the same way that it is to bonobos too. And I'm not criticizing bonobos. I'm not saying that they are not also capable of empathy, and that they also, they have a very fair sexual reputation for the way they behave. But yeah, I think we just overlooked some of these things in chimpanzees. And I think the picture of, because we share a common ancestor with the common ancestor of those two species, and we often think that, one of them is the evolution of the aggression in humans, and one is the empathic side. And it's really, we're a combination of the two within those two species as well, because they show a lot of within species differences. Groups will be more tolerant than one another, groups will be more aggressive than one another. It's all in the same way that we are as well.
Well, Dr. Jake Brooker is a psychologist and primatologist at Durham University in the UK. Jake, you set me up maybe 4 or 5 times this interview saying primates have sex, they touch each other's privates, they console each other sexually. I didn't crack one joke, and that's a career first for me. Also, thank you for sharing your research. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I could see you restraining yourself, and I respect it.
I honestly don't know why at this point, but I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Up next, we'll tackle misinformation, specifically who is most likely to be a victim of it. Think to yourself, which group of people often falls for fake news on the internet? We'll answer that question and give you tips for how to protect yourself from misinformation after the break.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. last show with David Cooper. Procrastinate your life away with us.
Who's most likely to fall for fake news? A massive study says Gen Z conservatives, but another telltale sign, people who think they're great at spotting lies don't seem to be. I'm here with someone who quizzed 66,000 people to find their susceptibility to misinformation and discuss who really gets fooled online. His name is Dr. Friedrich Götz. He is a social and personality psychologist and professor at the University of British Columbia. Fritz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, let's start simple here. What exactly is misinformation susceptibility? How do you even measure something like how susceptible I am to believing the earth is flat without actually asking me if the earth is flat?
Yeah, that's a great question. So misinformation susceptibility, I think, is fancy academic jargon for how likely are you to get fooled by fake news? How good are you at telling the difference between what's real and what isn't? And, that's a really critical skill these days because all of us are constantly exposed to various types of news, some of which are likely true and some of which are likely false. Now, to the second part of your question, how do you measure this? That's actually been a bit of a head scratcher for academics too for a really long time. And so a couple of years ago, colleagues of mine from the UK and I, we started to try and do better at developing this measurement. And we, spent a couple of years doing something that's really dry and very technical, coming up with a good measure. And I'll not bore you with the details, but in a nutshell, what we do is we give people 20 headlines. 10 of those headlines are real news headlines that have actually been published. And an independent fact-checking organization has rated them as being factually correct, but also politically unbiased. So that's the part of the test that's real. And then we have 10 other headlines that look very, very similar, but they are fake. And the way that we know this is because we came up with them in a combination of looking at previous conspiracy theories and false news that have been debunked, but also using a little bit of artificial intelligence here to tweak them and make them look really believable. And then you just give people those 20 headlines and let them tell you which ones are real and which ones aren't.
It's interesting you say it's a head scratcher. For example, if I believe in conspiracy theories, it may not be that I fell online, like I read it online and fell victim to them. Maybe it was a friend, maybe it's my spouse. Is there a difference there? Like the sort of how, the mechanism of how? Just because I believe in a conspiracy theory doesn't mean I'm necessarily susceptible to a misinformation headline? Or are those two things the same thing?
They're not the same thing, though they are what we call correlated. So that means that if you were one of those things, you're more likely to also be the other. But there's not a one-on-one correspondence. Like you can't say, somebody believed this hoax that was later disproved, so they will necessarily believe everything else. That also goes the other way around. Some people are generally really good. They get fooled rarely. But given how often all of us are being exposed to different news, all of us fall prey to it at some point. Ultimately, nobody is safe. All of us will fall prey to this at some point.
Well, that leads me to an interesting finding, and maybe I'm jumping too much to a conclusion here, though. People who think they are completely safe from them, people who deeply believe they can tell the difference between fake news and real news, misinformation and truth, those people score worse than others, don't they?
Some of them do. So I think the way to understand this is really to segment the findings and think about different groups. So we looked generally at misinformation susceptibility, but we also looked at how that relates to, say, whether you're man or woman, whether you're politically liberal or conservative, whether you're more formally educated or less formally educated. And so there are interesting effects there that, for example, women do worse than men, but also women are more aware of their own abilities and the limits than men are. And generally, we see that certain people do better and they are more confident. They have every reason to be confident. It's just even the best performing people in our sample are not perfect. And that, I think, is really the take home. It's not so much that they're worse than others necessarily. It's just they're not as good as they think they are. And that, I think, is a real danger.
So if I tell myself I'm immune to it, I'm likely not, is what you're saying.
Yeah. And what I am saying is I don't think any of us is immune to it. So, take me, for example. According to my own research, I should score pretty highly. I am a man. I have a PhD. I am politically liberal. So I have, all the recipe ingredients, according to our own research, that would make me relatively immune. And yet, I have fallen prey to this before, and I will likely fall prey to it again. So it's really not about an absolute statement. It's not about this can't happen to you. It's about how do you minimize the amount of times this is happening to you? And most importantly, how do you make sure you don't contribute to the spread of misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, that's where it really gets dangerous, especially if it's disinformation, right? A primary source that's lying on purpose to achieve some goal, and then you share it as if it's truth, believing it's truth. That's really where the danger is. Is a simple fix to stop telling ourselves that we're immune? Like, will that make us more immune, ironically speaking?
I don't
like I say I'm not immune, and by saying that it makes me more immune.
No, I totally see where you're coming from. And, I wish it was that easy. I could probably write amazing trade books and sell them if the fix was that simple. The reality, I think, is that this is a promising first step. Awareness is the first step towards getting better, but it can't stop there. So I think what you need to do after that is really educate yourself. Take the time to check your sources. Do trainings if you can. My colleagues over at the University of Cambridge, they have developed this game called the Bad News Game. It's like a gamified intervention. It's meant to be super playful, takes like 20 minutes. And what this does is like you step into the shoes of a fake news tycoon. And the whole idea is that you try to build a huge following on a social media platform. But throughout the game, they explain to you how fake news work. And they help you to spot it better. So there's this thing, for example, that's really typical for fake news is oversimplification. It's a very simple explanation for a very complex problem. Say, take economics. The economy is tanking and people have a single scapegoat. They are like, the liberals are at fault or the conservatives are at fault. Like, one of those things that just says all the problems are because of one simple cause. That's a really easy telltale sign. Or emotionalization of language. It becomes super emotional when really it should be factual. And this game is teaching you all these things. And what we see is that people who play this game become better at telling fake news from real news, but also they become better at stopping the spread of misinformation. They don't contribute to that chain anymore.
That's really interesting. Let's talk about some of these groups. One of your finding was that, as you mentioned earlier, people with higher education are slightly worse at estimating their own ability. Are there any other groups that emerge? Like you mentioned, politically liberal, politically conservative folks.
Yeah, so we do see that extreme conservatives, they really believe that they're quite immune and they are not. So there's a fairly large gap for them. This is not true so much for people that are more like the center right of the spectrum. Center right, center left is not a huge difference. But at the extreme ends, and especially in the extreme conservative camp, you get to a point where people think that they're really good at this. And our data suggests they really are not. And that has to do, I think, with, echo chambers, filter bubbles. It also has to do with residential segregation. There's this big piece that the New York Times ran ahead of the last presidential election showing that purple neighborhoods almost no longer exist in the United States. People like selectively move to either very liberal or very conservative places. And so you can be in a life where what you see online and what you see in your own neighborhood both kind of adds up and creates a version of reality that seems really real to you, but it may not just be the full story. And I think that can lead to you believing that what you know is the reality, even though it may not fully be.
In a world where misinformation seems rampant, you talk about these problems being exacerbated by people moving into neighborhoods and places where they're more politically segregated and also researching this stuff. How do you stay hopeful, or are you just quietly screaming into the void each night?
No, no. I am, as a personality psychologist, I know that the personality is a powerful thing, and I am a diehard optimist. I am very sort of deeply, proudly, and desperately human. And I do think that we can turn things around. I think as humanity, we've overcome a lot of challenges, and I think we still can. But I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that this is a challenge. And I think one of the biggest goals for society, in my mind, that we should all have is to get back to a point where we can talk to each other, where we can agree to disagree, and where we can go back to consensus building. Because what's really dangerous about all of this, I think, is the emergence of individual silos everywhere across the political spectrum. This is not just the right, this is not just the left. I think this can happen anywhere and to anybody. That will get us further away from a shared world that we can all inhabit together.
Dr. Friedrich Götz is a social personality psychologist and professor at the University of British Columbia. Fritz, I've enjoyed this chat. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Coming up next, a lot of questions for someone who does a job I think none of us could do. They're an aerialist and circus performer. Join me after the break talking to someone who doesn't get dizzy flying through the air for a living. This is The Last Show. I'm David Cooper.
We're here because your heightened awareness deserves heightened entertainment. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Most people get dizzy when they step on a stool, or at least I do. Our guest today flies through the air for a living. They're an aerialist and circus performer doing things with her body that you and I would not dare attempt to do with a safety net and a prayer. Her name is Angola Murdoch. Angola, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I am fascinated by your job. I have been to circus events with aerial performers, and I don't know what they do because I can't even watch. Like, that's how I'm just thinking, like my mother, like, what are you doing up there? That's dangerous. Get down. So to that end, what do people get completely wrong when they hear that you're a circus performer and an aerialist? Like, what do they assume about your job that is just not true?
Yeah, well, I guess sort of when I started, people would assume that I was in like a circus with animals, like the traditional circus, but I've like actually never been in a circus with animals. So they have it sort of like that idea of that traditional circus in their head, where I'm more of a contemporary circus artist. So I guess that's one thing. And then it is dangerous what we do because it is high in the air. So, but I guess they sometimes don't think about like all the training we do, or that we don't just like, oh, I'm going to learn that big drop and just do it. Like you like learn slowly and safely. So that may be it.
It's not like those schmucks on the motorcycle who like do a 1,000-mile jump. It's like there's always a first time that you do it. You can build up to this.
You can build up to that. Yeah, exactly.
And to the animal end, it's funny, like attitudes have changed on that. Like I think 30 years ago, we'd all be happy to see elephants like going around in circle without thinking these animals might not be treated amazingly. Now, attitudes have changed on that. Like when I watch 90s sitcoms with like chimpanzees in it, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why are you taking advantage of that monkey?
I know. We were just watching some clips of The Littlest Hobo.
Yeah.
Do you remember that show?
I don't, but tell me what the clips contained.
Yeah, it was in like the early 80s in Ontario, and it was this dog that just saved the day every day. And that was like every episode he was like getting Jane out of the well, or like at one point he's driving a plane and
makes sense.
Yeah, another time he has like a big rifle in his mouth. So yeah, we were just looking at that thinking like, oh yeah, that was the 80s. I wonder how that dog got treated, but
not well. There's a reason why most animals are CGI now. But let's get back to aerial performing.
Yeah.
Is there a moment in your life when you thought, yes, I'm going to dangle from the ceiling for a living?
Yes, totally. Like my first contemporary circus show was when I was around 14, and I had been doing gymnastics already. So when like the Silks performers came out, I was like, that is what I want to do.
That's when you get kind of like tangled. I mean, you probably take umbrage with the word tangle, but from my vantage point, you get tangled up with the silks from the ceiling, and you go up and down and you drop from them, and it's like a real nail biter for someone watching.
Yeah. And I mean, it is tangle. Like we're wrapping knots around our bodies that will like stop us at the end of the knot. So you do have it right. We're like tangled up there and we untangle.
I've seen that. And then as you drop, you get the gasps. But at the last minute, the ropes or the fabric kind of catches you.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any fear involved with like fear of heights, fear of getting dizzy? Like I imagine, is it a scary thing to do, or you just kind of get used to it?
Yeah, it's exactly that. You get used to it. Like I don't have a fear of heights, but the first time I'm doing something really high or big, like I'm definitely scared of it. And it's the same thing we were talking about, like you work up to it. But I've hung off of cranes like a bunch. I've gone up like 200 feet. I've flown over Niagara Falls, and like it sounds scary to people, but for me, I'm like, that is so fun. I want to do it again.
This idea of like, what the heck am I doing doesn't pass through your brain at any moment, Like sometimes when I'm interviewing people on my show and it goes off the rails, I think to myself, what am I doing with my life? You must have that moment.
Oh, yeah. No, you totally do. You like there's, because you're also like you're under the lights and everybody's watching you as well as you're doing these dangerous things. So for sure, many times in acts, I've been like, I hope this works.
The physical demands of it, is it like you got to be in great shape, or can I just have like a beer belly and eat burritos all day and hope to be an aerialist?
Yeah, that's harder for sure. Yeah, we train like every day. I mean, I take at least 1 or 2 days off a week, but most of my days are spent training and rehearsing and building shows. So yeah, it's harder. The more you're in shape, the easier it is, and maybe more safer. Yeah.
I had a fire eater on the show the other day. We were talking about fire spinners, and their arms are always covered in like burn scars. That's just like a occupational hazard.
Yeah.
Does your body have like bruises on it at any given time?
Yeah. I have like this knee thing right now. It's a burn.
For those who can't see that on the radio, your knees are lacerated.
Yes. That's a silk burn. So it's like if you've ever like fallen on carpet or something, it's a carpet burn.
So you're just constantly covered in carpet burns.
Yeah, I mean, when you're learning a new trick, a new burn, where you're like, oh, that's where that's rubbing, okay. And as the more you do it, the less you burn, because your skin actually gets kind of harder. And there's places on my body that are like just always rough because I'm always sliding on that area.
Oh, you have like odd calluses here and there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like my hands, the listeners can't see it, but I have like major calluses on all of my hands.
This is like tough manual labor you're doing in some sense.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. No, construction workers and I have like the same looking hands.
Well, to those construction workers, you mentioned being over Niagara Falls, and maybe that's the answer to my question, but what's the weirdest or most dangerous thing you've done being an aerialist?
Yeah, we used to have this Canadian flag act that it's a huge 10-foot by 5-foot Canadian flag, and we're inside of it, like the sides of it are silks, like where you would see the panels of the red part, and then the inside, the leaf is like a spinning hoop. And we got picked up on a crane on one side of the stage and then lifted 100 feet up over a stage and then dropped in, and then we came out of these things. And that's there's a lot. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I've flown over Niagara Falls and you get yourself. I've started one of my acts. It was for a dryer company, like a clothing dryer company, and I started the act in the dryer.
Oh my goodness!
And then the silks came out. Oh, there was another one where I started in a fake paint bucket, and the silks came out of the paint bucket.
Wow, that's so much more dangerous than just jumping out of a cake, which was another thing you saw a lot on 90s sitcoms. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's true.
When you're around yuppies whose most exciting hobby is pickleball, or you meet a group of people and you're like, what do you do for a living? And they're all like, we're accountants. And they start talking to you about Excel spreadsheets. Do you judge people like that? Or are you just, you just consider your work a normal job like anyone else?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the other day we were actually at a party and someone was like, who has to get up in the morning for some job? And then kind of people went around for why they had to get up. And yeah, I was last, and I knew that what I was going to say, people were going to be like, what? Because other people were like, oh yeah, I got to get up and do my groceries or whatever it was. And so I don't judge people at all. I think everybody, if they find their passion, that's awesome. But definitely at parties, people will be telling me what they do. And then I know they're going to be like, what is your job? And I've got this little bit oh, they're going to be like, what? When they hear it. So
I'm similar to you, and I'm waiting for them to ask me, and then I say radio personality, and then no one ever cares. In my mind, I have the most exciting job, and everyone's like, no, get away from me, dude.
Oh.
Do you have to build trust with your fellow performers, if your life depends on them kind of thing?
And it does. Yeah, it's actually one of the most magical parts of my job is the relationships that you make with your riggers, or I do a lot of work with other aerialists, and you're literally I am hanging off of one arm with my hand off of my friends, and constantly. So our relationships, our friendships are very, very deep because of that.
Well, Angola Murdoch is an aerialist and circus performer in Toronto. You've got a show coming up in Toronto. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I do. It's at the Harbourfront Centre, and it's May 9, 10, 11. So it's coming up this weekend, and it's my solo show. So it's a show about, I have a titanium spine, and it's a show about that and how I became a circus acrobat.
Well, thanks for telling me about it. Angola, thanks for telling us about your job. I appreciate your time.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
It's May, Mental Health Awareness Month. You've probably heard people say the fight or flight mechanism, but there's a third path our brain can take: freezing, sort of like deer in the headlights. How can you watch out for it, prevent it, and understand it? That we'll cover after the break. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
When your therapist won't take your calls anymore, there's always The Last Show with David Cooper.
Have you ever felt stuck in a stressful situation? Like your body's functioning, but it's not moving. You don't feel alive inside. Your body's just frozen. Well, that's called functional freeze. And we're going to discuss this with a trauma-informed body psychotherapist and author, Marcia Bonato Warren. Marcia, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here.
Functional freeze. This is one of these terms that gets thrown around by people who don't know what they're talking about. I'm one of them. But it means something in psychotherapy. And it's something that I think a lot of people experience. So kind of going back to the beginning here, how is this different than the classic fight or flight response that everyone always talks about?
Yeah, that is a great question. I think when we talk about trauma, which, by the way, is so much more known now, excuse me, more known now, especially since COVID, because so many folks have experienced what it feels like to be in a trauma state. And a lot of times we talk about it being fight or flight, right? Which for flight, of course, it's the feeling of wanting to run, like racing heartbeat, wanting to get out of there. Fight, of course, just wanting to push stuff away, getting aggressive, like within yourself, just behavior around those ends. And all those things are like completely normal. And it's the first place the body goes in a trauma state. It's meant to protect us, meant to get the danger away and for us to be able to be safe. What a lot of folks don't realize is that if that danger is not, and it's a perceived danger, like it could be absolutely real, it could be something that's triggered from our past. If that doesn't get taken care of by fight or flight, then our body will go into the next place, which is called freeze. And another part of freeze is fawn or appease. So that's a slightly different state. So fawn, if you think about it, is more like people pleasing, trying to not be a threat to someone. So that's also a fascinating thing to take a look at. But freeze is where you literally just stop moving, right? So in the extreme states, you literally stop moving. It's your body's way of playing dead so that that threat leaves you alone.
It's a crude analogy, but like deer in headlights would be the response.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what you're seeing with the deer in headlights. But the thing about the deer in the headlights is that the deer knows when the threat is gone and they unfreeze and then they go, right? So as humans, because we have our brains and we try to make sense of everything, we often don't unfreeze, right? And if it's a repeated thing, or if we get triggered repeatedly, then we stay in freeze. And that's what we're calling functional freeze, is that we can still function, but a lot of what we're feeling is still frozen.
Do people realize they're in this state? I mean, obviously, if they talk about it and have understanding with it in a therapist's office, yes. But the average person, when they go through this experience, do they realize it?
I don't think so. I think we're getting to know, like I said, fight and flight a whole lot more, because that just seems to be like in the media, and everyone's kind of talking about it more. Freeze, in some ways, there's a lot of dissociation with freeze. And so because of that, people aren't in touch with it, literally, so you can be in it. And you're like, well, this just feels weird. And I just feel shut down. So I must be tired, or I must be sick, or I must just be overwhelmed, So there's a lot of other things that kind of come into play. And we don't realize it's actually, a trauma response our body is having.
Oh, so to that end, are there ways to unfreeze your body, to not have this response, to recognize it when it's happening and do something differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the first things, and you'll hear this a lot in therapy. So, shout out to folks that are in therapy right now, and with it being Mental Health Awareness, Month. And I would say always, seek help if you need to find help, right? Is becoming curious. The first thing is become curious, right? So starting to be like, wait a minute. I'm still feeling this way. What is happening with my body right now? What is happening with my life right now? Am I in a trauma response? Do I want to learn a little bit more about what that means and what that could mean in my body? And if you do get curious about it, it's like, all right, so was there something in my life that may have started this? Is there something in my life now that's asking my body to stay in a freeze mode? And then, another area I work with is intergenerational trauma. So it's like, what has been passed down to me that I've seen in my family, in my community, in my history, that has actually made it so that functional freeze is a way for me to survive, right? And do I want this still?
I'm glad you said it. I think for anyone who's gone to therapy, that first principle of being curious about yourself and what's going on is so important. But for those who haven't, I think it's a really good place to start. What else?
Well, the second thing after curiosity is really bringing awareness. And this is where, being a body psychotherapist, I love this because, part of what I do in therapy and I also teach is really, helping us start to listen to our bodies. And particularly in, Western cultures, our bodies we're separated from our bodies. My mother's Brazilian, my father is Native American. Like both of these cultures and me being in between the cultures is a different relationship that I've had with my body. But still living within the United States, I grew up with sort of that paradigm of my body is a little bit separate from me. And it's not. I mean, our bodies are with us all the time. They're with us, the moment that we come into this world, they're with us all the way through the end. And they can be our partners. Part of engaging with the body is learning its language, which is about sensation, internal sensation, and also external, factors like what's going on outside of us. So start to become aware, like notice, like, am I sitting still? Am I breathing right now? If I am breathing, how deeply am I breathing? Right. And then what is it that is happening when I'm in certain environments? Are there places like the office that I go to or school where I feel more of a freeze, right? Do I feel less of a freeze at home? And then alongside of that, in terms of having the body, kind of learning our language with the body, is what's going on in our minds? What are our thoughts? And then what are our emotions? So kind of do that triangle. I call it sort of a triangle of mind, body, emotions. Visit each place and start to develop your own relationship with each of those things going on within you.
It's very similar to what I do to help manage anxiety, like focusing on the breathing before an event that I know is going to spark a high degree of anxiety. Maybe it's a performance, maybe it's a date, I don't know what, but just focus on the breathing.
Yeah.
I think that's just a simple description of this kind of awareness of one's own body.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we can do to help with functional freeze?
Well, there's also this reminder that we can give ourselves that we actually have the ability to do something, right? So functional freeze is just that. It freezes us, right? So we're not supposed to do anything in the state, right? We start to shut down a little bit. Like I said, we dissociate. We may not even be moving, right? So think of kind of a third thing to do as action. What can I actually do right now? And it doesn't have to be huge. A lot of what unfreezes us are micro movements, not the big ones. And I mean that literally. It's like if you find yourself in a state of feeling dissociated, kind of, like your emotions are sort of flat, like you just don't feel like you're here, like move your little toe, move your pinky finger, blink your eyes, like seriously, just start moving a little bit, bring some movement back into your body. And it doesn't have to be huge. Certainly does not have to be like how they talk about the power stances. That's too much for functional freeze. Like we don't want to go all the way there because that's pretty big. That's like saying, hey, I'm here. And if you still feel like there's a danger, that means that the danger can find you pretty easily. So your body's not going to want to do that.
I ride the trains here in New York, and sometimes you're in a car with someone who's aggressive, unpredictable, who's shouting. And my default reaction is just to sit there and stay frozen. But I always try to tell myself, I can change cars, I can walk away. And it's kind of like fighting against my body of just wanting to stay there and be unnoticed, but maybe be in this person's path of destruction.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is ask your body what it wants to do. This is really fun. I invite your listeners to do this. Like, you don't even have to be in functional freeze for this. I used to do this when I was in line at the grocery store, or even in a store. It's like, okay, body, where do you want to go now? And I would just kind of follow whatever the impulse was. Of course, be moderate with your impulses, of course. But like, if I wanted to go left, I would go left. If I want to go look at, fruits, I would go look at fruits. But like, get my head out of the way, right? But also start to listen to what my body wants to do.
Well, Marcia Bonato Warren is a trauma-informed body psychotherapist and author. Check out her book, Movement and Identity, Multiculturalism, Somatic Awareness, and Embodied Code Switching. That's available wherever books are sold. Marcia, thanks for joining me so much.
Thanks so much, David.
Coming up, a new take on the age-old debate. Should you let your kids look at screens? And if so, how much? What gets lost in that debate for me? The actual health effects or psychological effects. And there are some, and they may not be what you think. Stick around to find out what they are.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Your nightly dose of unfiltered opinions and unexpected conversations. Unexpected Conversations. The Last Show with David Cooper.
People love to argue about kids and screens. It's an age-old debate, it seems. Too much screen time, too little, Bluey versus Roblox. It's the great modern parenting debate. But what's interesting is that your kids' screen time can shape your relationship with them. That's right, screen time not only affects kids' behavior, but also that emotional glue between a parent and a child. And spoiler alert here, handing your kid a tablet so you can finally pee in peace might come at a cost. We're here to discuss someone who's researched this. She's a psychology researcher at the Deakin University in Australia. Her name is Jacquelyn Harverson. Jackie, thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, David.
I have cousins, I have siblings, all with kids, different opinions amongst all of them with screen time, although I never have gotten a reason why. And now that I think about it, I feel like this never gets talked about. Everyone argues about the merits of it, but never the kind of what the impact is. And I'm so glad it's something you chose to study. So let's start there. How can an early child's development with screen time affect their relationship with their parents? This is kind of a surprising finding to me.
Yeah, this is a new finding through a review that we've just done this year on kind of the research done to date. So what we found is that the parent-child relationship obviously is really, really important, especially at this young age. So we're really focused on that really young age, 4 to 6 years. You know, kids are moving from home into kinder, into school. So they're facing really big challenges for really little people. So the parent-child relationship is really crucial at this point in time for them. And what we found is across the research so far that as screen time, so this is, just the time that kids spend on screens, as it grows up, the parent-child relationship does seem to deteriorate. But the tricky thing is that what our review shows is literally just the link. So we've got the link there, but we don't know why. So we don't know, is screen time causing the deterioration? Is a tricky relationship between a parent and child, is screen time an avenue of maybe regulating that or helping out with it? That's the nitty-gritty that we don't know yet, David.
Oh, that's interesting. So it could be some other factors causing parents to reach for screens and hand them to their kids.
Absolutely.
And those factors cause it, not just the staring at the screen itself.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that's the tricky thing and the big thing with, as you said, it's a big debate with screens and kids. And for parents these days, I'm a parent myself of 3 little kids as well. And, screen time doesn't come with a handbook. There's no kind of rules. We do what we think is best for them. So our research is really trying to find, the best way that we can integrate screens and technology for kids, because this is the world that they're growing up in. This is what they're going to become adults in and have to deal with. So how can we integrate it in these really young years in a really positive and beneficial way, and make sure that we're not, make sure that if there are these kind of negative links there, that we're kind of minimalizing them as much as possible.
Like there is a benefit to it. I was left alone with a screen in the 90s, and I and a crazy family that I didn't want to talk to. And as an adult, I became a computer programmer. If I hadn't had that screen time, I'm not smart enough to have done that career and started it at a normal age. There are benefits to kids being really good with screens, but it looks like there's also downsides. So should we be looking at it more like it's junk food, or more like it's a really good learning opportunity, or maybe a bit of both?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think what you've touched on here is something that's really important, and something that as researchers, like this review really shows that we need to go down the path of, and that is understanding the context and the content of the use. So just like junk food, exactly as you've said, we don't let our kids go down that aisle in the supermarket and just grab whatever they want and feed it to themselves. We kind of moderate that and we mediate that, a little bit here, a little bit there is okay. But you've got to understand that, you've got to eat your fruit and veg as well, right? Everything's in a balance. So screen time is kind of similar with that. So what we've found is, the studies that really looked at, kids using screens for learning, and that kind of, more interactive use of screens, that didn't show as much negative links with the parent-child relationship or with any other of the, well-being indicators we looked at, because we looked at, their behavioral difficulties, their social skills, and things like that as well. So we're really, kind of uncovering that, it's not just the amount of time that kids are spending on screens, it's what they're doing. Like, what are they actually doing? Who are they doing it with? If a parent and child is using a screen together, that actually creates an opportunity for bonding and for learning and for growth, as opposed to, if they're just using it by themselves, potentially doom scrolling on YouTube, funny videos. That's maybe a time for relaxation, but maybe we don't sit there and do that for 3 or 4 hours kind of thing.
Yeah, well, I stereotypically think of negative use, like the kid glued to the screen, ignoring the parents, ignoring the world around them, playing some video game. But I suppose there's something that looks a lot similar to like a parent reading to a child, which is them,
That's right.
Engaging with educational use together. I wonder what impact that has on a parent-child bond.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And what we found, so within our review, we didn't find, we found that there's not as much information and there's not as much research in this area to date as there is with things like, for example, behavioral difficulties. There's a lot of research in that space. But in terms of the parent-child dynamic, what we found is that, when used together, those kind of negative links aren't there. It's a kind of non-issue almost, if that makes sense.
If you had to rewrite the classic, like no screen time before age 5 with all your research, would you modify it to say like no screen time unless it's educational? Like what advice would you have to parents? Because it seems like everyone's got an opinion on this, but you're someone who actually does the research.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks. I think it's really tricky. I think what we need to remember is the screen time limitations and recommendations. So the recommendations for screen time pretty much across the world. So Canada, Australia actually based ours on your recommendations in Canada. And the recommendations actually come from more of a physical standpoint. So it's kind of like sedentary, use of a child's time and making sure that they're physically active, as opposed to the well-being standpoint so much. So the screen time recommendations are kind of more about maybe getting kids out and being active. That's where they were kind of developed from in terms of the child's physical well-being, with less of a focus on that kind of mental well-being and relational well-being. But I think it's really important that parents and carers, and educators, screens are in schools as well from really young ages, is just really focusing on, the experience in and of itself. Like it shouldn't just be a, kind of hand a kid a tablet and off they go for 2 hours.
Free for
it's,
all.
what are we doing together? Yeah. Or sitting down and, making those family traditions even, on school holidays, having a family movie night. Like that's a really great, bonding and family activity that you kind of work into your routines. So it's not that kids are using screen time separate to everything else. It's kind of just part of, the everyday life. So
what I'm hearing is be mindful, but there is no one like golden rule here. There's no one like authoritative viewpoint. And that just adds fuel to it. Everyone's going to disagree on this stuff.
Yeah, people are going to disagree. But I think the really key thing to think about is that moderation factor as well. Adults, we get to the end of the day and we're tired and, we might sit there on our screens, and that's just like for that complete downtime. We don't have the energy to do anything else. Our kids, they're like sponges, obviously, especially the young ones at these young ages, but they get tired too. So, a little bit of, program watching or playing games and things like that, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's when we go into those excessive, times of use, that's where we're really seeing those really negative links come through. So I think moderation is key.
And you got to lead by example, right? Like parents who are on the phone for 25 hours a day themselves, and then they say, do as I say, not as I do to their kids, and don't let them do it. Like that's what their kids are looking at and thinking is normal behavior.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the thing to note there is that the parents' use of technology can also affect that parent-child relationship as well. If you're looking at your screen, it's something that in the research world, I don't know if you've heard of this term, but we call it technoference. So if someone's looking at a screen and they're not 100% focused on the person they're talking to, be that another adult or a child, there's that interference there in the interaction. Yeah.
Technoference. I love that word. If anything, I'm going to use it all the time.
All the time now.
Thanks for chatting with me about what a screen-healthy household might look like and the impact it could have on your relationship with your kid. Jackie, I appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks so much, David. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Jacquelyn Harverson is a psychology researcher at the Deakin University in Australia. Up next, a wearable patch. It looks like a Band-Aid. You put it on your face and it can tell you how you're feeling, even if you're lying about it. Tell somebody you're fine. This patch knows you're not. How does it work? That we'll cover in a few moments. I'm David Cooper. This is The Last Show.
Your nightly rebellion against predictable radio and podcasts. The Last Show with David Cooper.
Imagine a sticker that could tell you if you're faking a smile by reading your skin, your heart rate, even your sweat. Well, researchers at Penn State have built just that, a small, stretchy patch that sticks to your skin and can read real human emotion. Joining me is engineering science and mechanics professor at Penn State University, Dr. Huanyu Cheng. Larry, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me here.
Let's start simple. What exactly is this sticker, and how does it read our emotions better than our own faces do?
Oh, sure. So it essentially consists two parts. The first one is a sensor to detect the signals from the skin surface in terms of the sweat, heart rate of the relevant information. And the other one is the data processing and transmission unit, where we can get to transmit data through Bluetooth and power that with battery. And we also designed this battery to be rechargeable, so you don't need to worry about running out of battery, but rather than get that charge afterwards. And with respect to the sensor, we do need to have the sensing signal to be accurate. So we need to make sure each signal is detected without being affected by the others. That's why we designed the so-called decoupled sensing. When you detect the heart rate without being affected by the sweat, when you detect the humidity level, that's not going to be affected by the deformation. And this is going to be more accurate than the face expression, because the facial expression can be very accurate when you want to show it. But for some scenario, you don't have the capability through stroke or other disease conditions, or in some cases, you don't want to show that through the daily communications, and people fake to be strong. And of course, in other cases where you have the virtual reality, you don't have the interaction with seeing each other, but rather with a sticker, you can communicate with each other through this communication.
Last week, I talked to a researcher who said AI was really bad at reading human emotion when it watched video. This is totally different, though. How are we measuring human emotion? How are you sure that you're accurate with your readings?
Right. So that's why it's accurate to just detect one signal might be off, but rather we have to collect the information from multiple dimensions in terms of the heart rate, the sweating, and the facial expression if you want to show it. So we do have these multi-modality sensors in terms of different motions, the heart rate, sweating conditions. So when you put all of this together, you can get a better prediction, similar to the way we do the disease diagnostics. When you have multiple information, you can actually increase the detection and the prediction accuracy.
So basically, you invented a Band-Aid sort of sticker that looks at your emotion. It can tell people that you're lying when you say that you're feeling fine. What is the goal? Like, why did you decide to create this and do research in this area?
Right. And initially, it comes from the interaction we had with the patient population who have gone through a stroke, and they can now really show the expression to others. And we really would like to have this additional dimension where we have the natural conversation and discussion with each other. And then we realize it can be much more applicable over the others in terms of the situation people fake to have different emotion. And when you say people are fun, but they are not actually fun, and they try to be strong, but actually have some other emotions building beneath the surface. And also when we get to work with the recent development in artificial intelligence, potential use for different applications, particularly in this extended reality, virtual reality, where we only have the limited information or dimension built into the current headset and wearables. And now we probably can be better to get this additional information in terms of motion when they play video games, interact with each other in this virtual reality. So yeah, we do see a lot of possible opportunities for other things in the future.
I mean, I remember that movie Ready Player One. Did you see that with like the virtual reality world that everyone stays on? I feel like we're one step closer to a virtual reality world where simple things like facial expressions and emotions would get conveyed in the game.
Exactly. So beyond the existing detection of the motion, but rather we can have this emotion and also other things in terms of tactile feedback. When you interact with each other, you get to have this additional dimension to really create something more like the natural setting we interact with each other.
I go to a psychiatrist and sometimes I show up to my sessions and I don't know, I just don't want to talk. I'm sure there's things going on with me, but I'm very closed off. It sounds like something like this could be used in mental health check-ins. Like my doctor would know that I was lying when I told him I was doing okay if I was struggling.
Right, exactly.
Is there applications here in that space?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we really hope this can be applied in the different situations, as you mentioned. When we are in the session, we don't really want to show the emotion. Or in other cases, we want to have this treatment evaluation on the drugs or different things you're taking. And you may not have the capability to get this monitored or evaluated by the physician at the time that is needed. But rather when you have the sticker, you can have the check on the compliance, whether you take the medication, how medication works over time. When you have much more rich data over time to be able to provide information that is more useful for the disease progression and the treatment evaluation as well.
Were you surprised by the accuracy of your work? Like I was reading it's almost 90% accurate in terms of reading emotions on your face. Were you surprised that computers were able to do that with just this sticker?
I think this is much more better over the past few years in terms of what people have been doing by looking at, for example, videotaping and other things just with the one dimension of the data. And then we have multiple sensing signals. We feel it's certainly going to be better. But of course, we have been testing this only on a few individuals. We're fully aware of the possibility across the individual difference. And so we hope we'll be able to scale up the study from just a few to maybe thousands, millions of people. And then we can account for the individual difference because they are all different for sure. And people is very different in this direction. And it's nice to see how we are going to see the performance of the sensor on a much larger population.
Scaling up to millions of people, are there any ethical red flags here? I'm guessing no one wants to like give a company or an organization a sticker that tattles on their emotions, that gives away their emotions when they don't want to communicate them. What do you think about that? Like, are there any ethical issues here?
Absolutely. So I'm just saying we would like to go after that route when there are enough people who are willing to do that. But of course, we probably need to get to sample the individual who are really comfortable, and that's the end target. But probably we need to go from this 100,000 and more, and it's certainly something we'll have to be pay attention to in terms of how we deal with the data privacy and all of the things people have been doing in the field will help us design the sticker in a way that it will protect the privacy to a level that's only shareable to the individual they are comfortable with in terms of the physician taking care of them or some other people who only have the data for internal analysis share with them, but not to the others.
Finally, is there any use for this in athletes, like tracking athletic performance, maybe helping with wound healing? I know every athlete, when they get injured, when they get asked about how they're feeling, they say fine, regardless of whether the wound is healed or not. Is there any implications there in the athletic space?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So we have been focusing on the emotion detection, but the sensing signal can actually be applied to the other directions as well, as you mentioned, in terms of the health monitoring of the wound healing status and also other disease conditions in different disease populations. So we can certainly monitor the information in terms of the temperature to alert for infection and deformation in terms of the closing of the wound over time, and also possibly for other disease application. One of the things we are looking at is the drug overdose. People have been in this situation, particularly in the past 20 years, and we don't have a way to detect that right in time. But if do, we'll be able to prescribe naloxone injection of that to reverse the process and to save millions of people. And so that's why we feel very excited about this possibility to apply the sticker, not only on the emotion detection, but also for the other different applications.
Wow, I'm imagining a day where an EMT arrives on scene to a drug overdose and maybe uses something like this. Well, Dr. Huanyu Cheng is an engineering science and mechanics professor at Penn State University. Larry, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
A divorce, a dog, and a legal first in British Columbia, Canada. A judge awarded custody of a pet like they would a kid. The not so ridiculous details in a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. The show that asks the questions other shows are afraid to ask. The Last Show with David Cooper.
A divorce, a dog, and a legal first in British Columbia. For the first time, a judge awarded custody of a pet like they would a child in divorce proceedings. This is part of a big shift in how the law sees animals, not as property, but as family. Joining us is animal lawyer and educator V. Victoria Shroff to explain what that means for future breakups where pets are caught in the middle. Victoria, thanks for joining me.
Pleasure.
I've always found this topic very curious because on the one hand, a pet is not a person, a pet is property. On the other hand, owning a cat, a pet really does feel like a member of the family. And the courts just kind of treat them like afterthoughts during divorces, at least in most jurisdictions and at least until now. Is that how you see things?
That's actually a fairly accurate description. I think 95%, the statistics I've seen of people think and believe and treat their pet like a family member, as they should. And I don't know who that other 5% are, by the way, but that was the statistic that I read recently.
They shouldn't own pets is who they are, Victoria.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how they got a pet if they're in that 5%, but most of us have seen pets as family for years and years and years. So it's a question of trying to say, where does the law see pets? Well, the law sees pets as property, as you rightly described. And even in BC, pets are still property under this groundbreaking new law that we brought in January 2024 under the Family Law Act, where there are 8 new factors that now apply to how a judge must decide what happens with the pet. So the judge looks through these 8 factors and then makes a ruling so that one person gets the pet. There's no more sharing or other types of schemes that people might have worked on. They are basically, the court is going to make an order for one person.
But if both partners want to share the pet, they still can. But it's just if it's more acrimonious or more adversarial, no sharing.
Absolutely. You can make your own private agreement, and that's a totally separate thing. But if a couple comes to the court seeking a joint custody or order for sharing their animal, they will be shut out. There's no such thing. The law specifically does not allow for sharing or joint ownership or custody, like people might call it pet custody, like visits. That's not happening. So a private agreement, absolutely. But by the court, no.
Even through the lens as pets as property, most courts just take the purchase price of the pet. For example, my kitty was like, I don't know, $75 to adopt at the pound, and that was just the vaccination fee or whatever. But we've poured thousands of dollars, like every vet visit and every little thing he has. So I feel like the courts kind of discount the true value of a pet, and the true investment of a pet, which could well be thousands.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, I think the intrinsic value of animals is so much higher than what somebody paid for, what the adoption fee was. Again, and it stems from the idea that animals are sentient beings. They're part of the family. They're not toasters.
They're not. Although sometimes I like my toaster more than my cat. But that's rare, and that's only when he's on a real annoying tear.
I'd like to know what your cat says about you, but that's another story.
I would too. He would think I'm just as annoying as I think he is. We're very similar. Let's talk about this case in BC where a judge awarded custody of a pet, kind of like they were a child looking for the best interest of the pet and how they ruled. Tell me about it.
So in this case, it was a case that was released in April 2025, and it's the first of its kind because it's a final ruling. And the court looked at the factors that are given under the Family Law Act, including the extent to which each spouse cared for the companion animal and the relationship between a child and the companion animal. So that was really important because the court was looking at the bond between a child who was an underage minor, like maybe 5 or 6 years old kid, and the dog. And the dog is called Toba. So the court sort of saw the bond that the child had and then in the end awarded the dog accordingly.
Does this mean there could be a third lawyer in proceedings? You got the husband, the wife, the husband, the two spouses, and then a separate lawyer for the pet? I mean, this is kind of interesting. This is new ground here.
Yeah, well, the person who really was awarded the pet, their lawyer would take care of that part of the aspect of the claim. Sometimes people are going to court only for the companion animal who gets the companion animal, but other times, if it's under family law, it could be part of a wider ask that they're there for. But to go back to your point about best interest, what we're really looking at is the best interest for all concerned test. And that's a subtle but important distinction, because what we're looking at is we're saying it's not just what's in the best interest of the dog or the cat or the humans, it's what's best for everybody concerned. So of course, the animal welfare is a big component, but it's also, as in this case, we saw the bond between the child and the animal, and that factored in quite significantly, as far as I can see from the judgment. And the fact is that sharing a pet often fails the best interest for all concerned, because it's a flashpoint of conflict. People use the pet as a weapon. And so in the end, sharing will be like, oh, that person was late dropping them off. And, it gets into a whole thing. So sharing is not always caring when it comes to pet custody.
If one partner bought the pet, let's assume it's a very fancy breed or something, and it was very expensive, but the other partner did all the feeding, did the walking, dressed it in embarrassing outfits for Christmas and took photos. Does emotional labor count when looking at the best interest of the pet, or is it just, I bought this thing, it's mine?
No, that it definitely counts. Who is the person who did all the vet visits and took the family photos and set them around and had, maintained the pet's Instagram account? All of that is something that, can be considered in the bigger scheme of things, because usually there is out of the couple, there's usually one person who is more pet oriented and who remembers to, like in the case of a kitty, buys the litter, and makes sure that the cat stays in when, the door opens and the cat's trying to run out. There's somebody who takes a little bit more care, and that's usually the case in most couples. Yeah.
So, Victoria, you're not just an animal lawyer and educator. I'm guessing by the many photos of pets behind you, you're an animal lover. Is this, from that lens, is this a shift that you are happy to see? Is this a shift you'd like to see for other courts, maybe other provinces, maybe some U.S. states? Is this a general shift you would like to see for judges to stop treating them like they're just property not worth that much?
Very much so, because I think that, it goes to the heart of the idea that pets matter in society, that people really treat their animals as they should, as family members who have value way beyond their monetary price. And yeah, I have had interest from people approaching me from other provinces, because this is the only province, British Columbia, where I live, where this law is. We don't have this law anywhere else in Canada. There are pockets of laws that see companion animals differently in the state too, but it's not across the board. So yeah, absolutely. Would I like to see this become more widespread?
You are an animal lawyer, though, and it's not just all about divorces and custody. There must be some fascinating areas of animal law that people don't realize exists. Can you quickly describe one?
Yeah, I've had some very interesting horse cases, wildlife cases. One of the horse cases I had that I can mention is that one of my clients was served while she was in a horse ring for defamation, because it's the horse world. And so if you slag off somebody's animal, you could be sued for defamation when somebody has a prize horse. That was kind of unique.
Served right in the ring? That is, I'm imagining like in the rodeo, like, someone's running around on a horse lassoing sheep and they get the papers right there.
Well, no lassoing of sheep, because I totally disagree with rodeo, but it was actually dressage where she was showing her horse in a horse competition. She got served. So it was something. Yeah.
Well, Victoria Shroff, KC, is an animal law lawyer at Shroff Animal Law. Check out her book, Canadian Animal Law. Victoria, it was great talking to you about this stuff. I appreciate your time.
Thanks very much, David. Bye now.
Up next, amazing viral art made out of the most ridiculous materials, parodying your favorite or not so favorite politicians. What could it be made of? Find out with me in a few moments.
Want to be part of the last show with David Cooper? Call us and join the conversation. 1-888-505-6644. Turning headline news into punchline gold. 5 nights a week. The last show with David Cooper.
People have called our next guest an artistic giant, a creative genius, a once-in-a-generation visionary. Most of those people have been me. Today on the show, meet, mockery, and mortadella. How's that for alliteration? Guelph, Ontario-based artist Barbara Salsberg Mathews is turning world leaders into deli platter portraits, and honestly, they're high art. Her work to me is both hilarious and maybe a deep social commentary. Bon appetit, Barbara. I'm so excited to talk to you today about your meat portraits.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm having such fun doing these. It's very therapeutic as well.
I know we look at the news sometimes and we aren't exactly happy with our world leaders and the people around them. And I think that would be an understatement. Let's start with Elon Musk's portrait. And why prosciutto? Why is that a great meat to capture this eccentric billionaire, SpaceX, Tesla, doing things with the U.S. government that a lot of people are unhappy about? Why prosciutto?
I think because I found meat is a really good base layer. And then I could use different kinds of meat, like mortadella, if I want something a little lighter. And if I want to make shadows under the eyes, then I could use some other kind of delicatessen meat, maybe spicy one.
So there's no deep thought on what meat choice. It really is just the color.
It's all about the color and shape as well for Elon, because his face is like a square or rectangle. So I found a sandwich ham was perfect for his face.
Okay, we got to take about 1,000 steps back.
Oh,
Why meat portraits of these figures? What inspires you to create this art? I love what you're doing, but how do you arrive there?
well, I'll summarize by saying I used to do hyper-realistic acrylic painting of architectural buildings. And unfortunately, I started to find my right arm weak and my hand started to shake. And I turned out I have Parkinson's disease. And I felt pretty down for 2 years. I didn't do any art. But then I got mad at the politics around me. So I started to do these food portraits. And I went from there. People were contacting me to get T-shirts and prints and note cards. So I thought, I think I've hit a nerve here, so that's how it started.
They're so weird. They're so fun. There's something that feels like they're a deep social commentary while also being so light.
Yeah.
Are you surprised that people love your meat portraits?
I am. And I'm having a wonderful time. I love making people laugh. It's so inspiring. And in fact, I involve sometimes my followers on my Instagram page, which is Maddie's Mom _ 4U, if people want to follow me. And I would share with them here, like I did Putin. And I had 3 different photographs of Putin, and I had people vote which one I should transcribe into food art. And that was great. And then I asked, what should I use for the nose? So, and we start voting on it. And it's a lot of fun.
There's so much here. There's the Parkinson's. There's rising up with a new medium when your hands begin to shake. There's food as politics, humor as resistance, meat as it spoils stinks, as do so many political figures these days. There's the interactivity you have with your audience deciding on. There's so much there with just a silly meat portrait.
Oh, what I also should mention as a retired high school art teacher, I used to be head of art at Northern Secondary School, is aesthetics. What makes good art? So I try to take that to my food portraits. And if you're thinking about Deli Don, my interpretation of Donald Trump, I knew I had to use corn silk for his hair because Donald Trump's hair is a force of nature. And I think it should even have its own Instagram account. It's just a wonderful, wonderful presence.
I wonder if the U.S. government should make a new office, the office of the president's hair. I mean, it really is just this distinct, oddly amazing, and I don't mean amazing in a good way.
No
thing.
Oh well, there's so much going on there. I like the mouth as well. I don't know if you had a good look at what I used for his lips, but roasted red pepper is a really good shape maker because it's very flexible. But then I shoved a lot of leftover fat into the center of the mouth because it was left over from when I sliced around the mortadella and, the prosciutto. I don't like throwing out food, so that was a use for it.
I don't think anyone likes throwing out food. Is there a world leader that you're particularly fond of? And if so, what would you use to make a portrait of them?
That I need to think about that. I will need some. That's food for thought. I haven't got anything that jumps to mind offhand, but I'm open to suggestion.
There might be a politician out there that's likable. What about another non-political figure who's famous that you could make a portrait of that you liked?
Oh gosh, why is my brain not working right now?
Well, I think it's a comment on the state of things right now. There's so few people that we like out there.
Okay, we can go with that. I'd love to do your face, David. You have a beautiful, wonderful, expressive face.
Oh, my.
I would love to work with maybe some baby broccoli for your hair, pickled onions from your eyes. And, there's a lot of potential just looking at your face right now.
There was a Sotheby's, like a famous art auction house here in New York. I think they're international. And some conceptual artist, I don't remember much about it, but I covered it on this show, auctioned a banana duct taped to something for $6.2 million. The banana went bad, but the art itself had like a certificate that you bought the original duct taped banana.
Oh.
If that piece could go for so much money, what do you think a meat portrait at its best of a world leader could make?
Well, I think $1 million is reasonable to ask for. At least go start there.
What can art say about the anger that we have towards politicians, that op-eds, that articles, that commentators can't?
Well, I know one thing is that this kind of art, not necessarily made out of food, but the caricatures, has been around since the birth of people kind. And, it's been always there. Pompeii, they found caricatures of the leaders and, with an elongated nose and stretched out ears. So people are having fun with their leaders' faces since, a long time now. That's nothing new there. It's just the way I use food, which is a little different.
Do you think the ability to kind of make fun of our leaders is an important core of Western values and free speech and things like that?
Oh, yeah. It's therapeutic. You need to laugh. Could you imagine just feeling depressed and mad all the time? You'd be pretty miserable to be hanging around with. So you need to laugh. And any outlet like the caricatures, the food art, beautiful. Bring it on.
Are you laughing while you make these things? As these distorted meat-based faces come together, are you laughing to yourself and thinking, what a ridiculous thing I've done?
I am. It's kind of funny. I think if there was a fly on the wall watching me put these together, they'd be cracking up laughing. Like, I've discovered new ways of using bean sprouts. They're so expressive. I was thinking maybe for Deli Dawn bean sprouts, but I went with the corn silk hair.
Well, your work is hilarious and in a way, deep social commentary. Your name is Barbara Salsberg Mathews. You're a Guelph-based artist. Barbara, where can people find images of your meat-based political art? It's so amazing.
Well, you can go to my Instagram account, which is Maddie's Mom, MADDYS _4U, or my website, Salsberg Mathews. And Mathews only has one T because I'm the economical Mathews.
If you don't like throwing out food, you don't like wasting teas.
Exactly. You got it. You got me. And I'm so glad to have been interviewed on your show. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you. That's the show. Thanks for listening to it. Don't forget to check us out online at www.lastshow.pizza. That's lastshow.pizza, not .com. Look up our podcast. Subscribe to it. I'm David Cooper. This is, you guessed it, The Last Show. Kisses?